The Secure in Mind podcast series is an educational initiative of the Cybersecurity Advisors Network, or CIAN. CIAN is an international not-for-profit trust network of experts in technology, policy, ethics, and good practice. Our mission is to strengthen society's safety, resilience, and ability to fight against cybercrime and similar threats. Visit us at cybersecurityadvisors.network. Good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are, and welcome to the latest in the Cybersecurity Advisors Network, or CIAN's installment in our ongoing Secure in Mind podcast and video series. These are a number of conversations with interesting people all around the cybersecurity ecosystem in various areas of activity and expertise, whether in technology, policy, activism, or just simply interest. Where we discuss topics of interest to our stakeholders all across the world. And today I'm joined by a gentleman who was referred to be one of our members, in fact, our presidents. He's the CTO and co-founder of Passbolt, an authentication provider. We'll talk a little bit about that. And I'd like to welcome Remy Bertot. Remy, if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit, who you are, where you come from, what you do, and maybe talk a little bit about Passbolt and what you guys do.
Thanks for having me, John. It's nice to be on the show. So I'm Remy, as you mentioned. I'm from France originally, but I'm living in Luxembourg. I'm a software engineer by trade, but I've been in the software industry for more than 20 years now. So I've done a lot of different things, and cybersecurity is one of the fields for which I've worked in the last few years quite extensively. So right now I'm working, as you mentioned, on Passbolt, which is an open source password manager for designed for collaboration. So it's a little bit different from your regular password manager, because we didn't start from a place where we built a password manager for individuals, but we created like ones that was designed for organization and for collaboration specifically. So one of the key differences is that it's fully open source. So it's not open core. It's fully 100% open source, and we service a few 100,000 users every day. So we have the responsibility of keeping all this password secure and trying to build solutions that are future-proof in the field of authentication.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'd like to talk a little bit about password managers initially. Specifically, it's taken long enough to get us to the point where people are actually using secure passwords, secure enough and different enough that they need password managers. You guys, 1Password, KeePass, whatever. Over the last 10 years, we've seen an increasing move also to 2FA, to biometric authentication. What do you see as the role of the classic password manager in an age of increasingly technologically advanced and different forms of authentication? Are we
Yes.
going to stay with your classic text password, or how do you you mentioned future proof, and I'd like to touch on that. How do you see this evolving in the coming maybe 3 or 4 years?
So that I had this conversation with a lot of people in the industry. For example, I met like the gentleman from Okta, and people from 1Password as well. And we all have a different vision of what it means, in the long run. But there is like several components in the landscape. You have, for example, the legacy systems that are never going to change. Typically, they require you to log in with passwords because nothing existed at that time. And, these are the systems that the companies have problem getting rid of. And they will still use password for a long time because nobody's touching them, nobody's going to move them. And they're probably going to have requirements like, you should change your passwords every 40 days because they know that, they are not storing the credentials securely there. So that's one category of, the legacy space where password, I think, will be relevant for quite a long time. Then you have like what I would say like a password-based authentication that is required for like privilege access management. So typically, you're always gonna have like a master password on, an appliance like a router or something like this. So, and even though like some administrators may have like individual accounts, you're still gonna have like a master account in case, all the administrator leaves and you're left with recreating things from scratch. So this is another category where I don't think like the password will disappear anytime soon. There might be like some additional factor authentication applied to it, but they will still have like this space. And then there are like things like systems that are more prone to evolve, like for example, like web-based application where you have an active development team, and these people basically keep password as a method of authentication, even though they support other method of authentication like single sign-on for the company-wide authentication, but they kept password in case that single sign-on is off, and you have an alternative method to log in case that thing is done. And then you have like the new stuff that is coming, like so we touch a little bit on SSO, but there are like new authentication method like passkeys that are signature based and that are closer to, for example, authentication mechanisms that are present in more technical protocol like SSH, where you would basically have like a public private key pair and you'll perform a signature and you'll be able to verify the key pair from the server, and the server will be able to verify your keys as well. And so from my perspective, the landscape is not going to change drastically, at a very fast pace, but it's still going to have the initial inertia of all these legacy systems that are set up everywhere. So for me, the passwords are here to stay. And even for these new authentication methods, there will still be, account recovery mechanism that will probably rely on, this older mechanism like password. So for example, if you set up like passkeys for your Google account, you'll still have your password to reset your passkeys in case you lose your passkeys. So from my perspective, passwords are here to stay, but like they might become less and less used and be more used in extreme scenarios where you lose your stuff, for example.
Fair enough. And I think one of the it's a relatively niche topic, but one of the big annoyances of a lot of password managers is integration with various systems and applications. I see this. My phones they're all iOS based, and it's still a lot of copying and pasting, especially with OS level passwords. Do you guys how do you guys chase down, are there growing integration standards, APIs that you guys are using? We'll talk a little bit about FIDO, see if they're doing any work in that area in a few minutes. But what's your experience in basically trying to make sure that stuff just works together, that gives a more seamless user experience?
On mobile, it's relatively easy because like now, I would say since like 2 years, like the APIs that are provided at the OS level allows for like, queries application that serves as credential stores. So especially on iOS, most of the time you would have, the iOS operating system calling the registered credential manager on your phone to, prompt to select for a given website or app the regular credential. There are still some limitations. So for example, how do you link an application name to a domain? And sometimes, it's not able to, link that, I don't know, like Airbnb app is related to the credentials that you have stored that is linked to Airbnb.com. Like, especially for applications like Passbolt that are self-hosted, we cannot register, the where your Passbolt URL So then we cannot, prompt for that. So from the name of our apps, because the app doesn't know where Passbolt is installed everywhere, So ultimately, you do have some edge cases like this on mobile that don't really work as one would expect. On Android is a little bit similar as well. You have some capabilities like if you do like on some system you are required to some apps you are required to use, for example, the accessibility keyboard to be able to enter things properly. And Google doesn't really like when one use this API, so there's always like a fight on with Google on like how to explain to the user that enabling that settings would mean that this type of application will be able to see and control everything that is in forms. So there's like technical limitations on how to bridge the gap between like apps and website, but there's also um, conflicts between like what the operating system wants in terms of security and what we want in terms of usability as credential provider. And so this is where the friction is. On the web itself, it's even more complicated because you have every single website is different. So like every login form is not necessarily W3C compliant. So you will have like broken HTML, and your browser plugin is supposed to detect and understand like that weird thing that you did is a form.
It's 2023 and we're still doing page scraping for some pages, which just blows me away. I mean, the thing that prompted me to ask that question was, I mean, specifically in iOS, you enter your Apple password again, which does not even allow you to call the iOS keychain, which just user annoyance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this loops. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about FIDO now. Fast Identity Online is a nonprofit. It's been around for about 10 years. You guys are a member of that. You mentioned passkeys before, so I think that's a good segue into FIDO, what they're doing, what the current status of passkey deployment is. What are some of the goals of FIDO? Who are members? Tell us a little bit about the organization and what it's doing.
So FIDO Alliance was created in middle of 2000s, and they were basically a consortium of larger organizations that wanted to end passwords. Basically, that's the mission of the organization, is to make sure that password disappears.
Apropos our first topic.
Yes. So they developed several standards and protocols. So one of them that was the first one to be really popular was like universal two-factor authentication. So it was hardware-based device to allow like signing to provide basically additional factor authentication on a website or system that supported that protocol. And then from that, based on this work that was done, the FIDO2 standard was worked on, which in partnership with the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium that does the standardization for the stuff on the web, became what is known as Web 10. So Web 10 is implemented on some of the websites, and it's basically the same technology than passkeys. The difference being that passkeys are supposed to be available across multiple devices. So initially, what was just, for example, for hardware key or operating system level key management, now with the passkey standard, you are able to, for example, store the keys on your phone and have an interaction with the browser and sign a request that is made inside the browser using your mobile phone. So that's pretty much like very shortly the evolution of the work that was done as part of FIDO Alliance. So FIDO Alliance includes organizations like YubiKey that do hardware devices for storing keys, and you also have organizations like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Okta, 1Password, Dashlane, and more recently other password managers have joined like us, and Bitwarden, and other password managers. So initially it was made by companies in the hardware space, and progressively like there was more and more software company working on like software solutions that were like solving problems in this space, and now it have come to include password manager that are basically credentials manager, and that will help solve this problem of storing passkeys and moving them around pretty much.
Okay.
So there are also other players, like for example, I think Yahoo is there, and you have like other companies that do not necessarily build authentication system, but that rely on these standards, and they want to make sure that these standards answer to their use cases.
Okay, that's really good. I'm going to link to Fido and Authn in the description for the video and the podcast. One thing I'd appreciate if you could go into at a high level for our users who are not so familiar with authentication, authorization, etc. concepts. Where do Authn and, for example, OAuth fit into things? Where does that they're seem fairly complementary, but can you talk a little bit about authentication, authorization, delegation, that kind of thing?
Yes. So OAuth 2 is like a protocol that was devised to replace single sign-on protocols that were a little bit old. So like you have historically for single sign-on inside a company, you had access to the SAML protocol, which is like XML based, and it's quite complex, and you have like even language to define what will be the protocol itself, what would be included, and so at some point, like,
thank you for making me feel old with SAML.
so like a bunch of people came together, were like, okay, can we make like a subset of this in modern with a more less flexible and more modern approach that would be easier for developers to implement, so that we can have more adoption. And that's where OAuth came to be. And OAuth 2 has been used, for example, by Microsoft or Google, or basically even like Mozilla, to perform delegated authentication. So what happens is like you're sent on a third-party website, you come back to the original website with a signature, with a code, and then basically that the backend of that website query that third-party system is like, okay, is the code valid? And check the signature of the answer, and then you are logged in through that basically third-party system into this other website, the main website you're trying to log in. So this is, still, I think the main login experience that people have, when they go on the web and they click on, login with Google or any other service provider. And on top of OAuth, basically there's what is called OpenID Connect, which refers to the last step of this authentication process, where basically you can get not just the fact that you are logged in, but also the user information that are associated with this authorization to log in. And that gives you some, for example, it can give you some role or some claim, on who you are, that you can use to perform authorization inside the system. So this is, what people experience on a daily basis. And passkeys are quite different because they don't rely on a third-party system like Microsoft or Google, but they rely on a key pair that is stored on your device. So when the the WebAuthn protocol or the passkey protocol, if you want, it's a very simple protocol where you have a setup and you have a login. So you have two operations that are possible. It's either basically you're new and you register a new key pair, or you're trying to prove that you own that key pair by performing a signature operation. The main difference with passkeys compared to passwords is that it prevents phishing. So this key pair is associated with a domain. And so when so you know that you can only log in with this key pair on that particular domain. Like another domain cannot ask for to prove for a signature on a domain it doesn't own, because at the device level, like there will be a check on the URL. So it's quite different from password, where you can create like a fake website and ask people to enter their credentials. But with passkeys, the anti-phishing capabilities are built in the protocol.
It seems to be a really interesting approach also to dealing with not only phishing, but also, we've had in the past decade and a half the occasional root key related attack. So basically, generally making website authentication more reliable. And for those of you who are watching or listening who are not too familiar with the intricacies of authentication, I'm glad you mentioned OpenID and SSH. I'll link to, what is OpenID, what is SAML, the difference between, identification, authentication, authorization in the comments. So if you want to read up a little bit what happens, but when you click that authenticate via Google link, so you're not just, your eyes aren't glazing over while we're talking about the details here. I encourage you to read up on that. It's actually quite interesting. Let's just shift gears. We've talked a lot about authentication and identity, protocols and solutions. Open source. In one of our sister channels, we had a gentleman on from Red Hat a couple of months ago talking about some of the challenges and opportunities in open source development. Not specifically in the security area, but you guys are an open source tool. And I think so you're a good person to talk about what are some of the challenges in especially in a security environment, developing open source software, making it commercially viable, and also cooperating with other initiatives, that everybody has something to say. Give me some experiences, give me some keywords and some pieces of advice also for people who are, they want to build a new open source security tool. They're a startup that wants to go open source. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah. Initially, when we started this project, one of the requirements was that this project will be open source. Not just because it was interesting from a strategic point of view to do that in an open source fashion, but also because this is where we come from, as millennials that have been raised with open source software. Like for us, this is part of our values and what it represents. The fact that knowledge should be accessible to everyone, and that everyone should be able to learn and understand the technology that is driving their life is part of our value system. So this is like a moral choice, if you want. And then we also have like a business choice. It is interesting for us to make open source software because it has some interesting properties. So for example, when I want to build trust with my user base or the customers, the fact that everything is open and transparent means that I cannot hide my mistakes. So if, I'm not in a position where I can, put the dust under the carpet and, every change that I make, people can be like, oh, you changed that thing and that looks like a security issue. What is it? Explain it to me. And you are forced to have this level of transparency, which I think in the security world is quite important, because you want like not to prove that you're perfect, but you want to prove that, people can trust you and can trust that you will react.
Let me jump in there quickly, because I actually want to touch on that. And by the way, compliments, because I'm the product of the early 90s, and this is an age when the development of the internet and the web was had a lot of ideology and a lot of enthusiasm before, the dot-com booms made things very commercial. It's really, really good to see millennials and Gen Z keep this idea of open access and being able to combine commercial success with this kind of idea that the community will benefit from things and can participate. So kudos on that. But I do want to touch on the security aspect because it's an eternal discussion, not always well informed about. Yes, in theory, having an open source product makes it more secure because everybody can do code reviews. In your experience, does that happen? Have you guys been called out on this? And one of the reasons I ask about this is because one of Cyan's sister organizations, which I'll plug here, the Good Faith Cybersecurity Researchers Coalition, is dedicated to pushing legal reforms that protect vulnerability researchers. And that's obviously more towards commercial software. For you guys in open source, have you actually had somebody do a code review? Do static analysis on your code base, GitHub, whatever, and say, hey, I found something? Or have you guys done this?
Yeah. So I think it's Linux Star says like given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. So it shows that with the power of open source, you can have access to a lot of eyes and like make all bugs shallow. But if you do not have eyeballs, then basically like you're back to square one. So that's the most important thing is like having enough eyeballs looking at it. And if you're a small open source project, obviously you're not gonna have the same level of attention than if you're having millions of users and companies like having like pretty bad impact if something wrong happens to you. So initially we didn't have many eyeballs on our project because we didn't have many users. But as our user base grew, then we had more. So the first audit that we had was done by a French car manufacturer. I won't name who it is, but you can guess. It was
there's not a lot of them, so we'll just leave that. That's for the viewers.
So basically, like they were like auditing the software, and they paid a independent security researcher to have a look at it, and that was our first audit. But obviously, that's not end all situation. The software is always evolving, and so we have been financing our own audit for quite some time. So we do like I think we've done around 15 audits in total. And so this year we already had 2, for example, and they are like week-long audit that involves like several security researchers, like 2, 3, or depending like how much it is. So the last one we had, for example, where the results are not published yet, was on LDAP. So the LDAP component of the solution. And we work with open source software. So when we do these audits, we also make sure that we are auditing the underlying layer and not just our part, So this way we can also give back to the open source community. So this has happened in the past where we had like community projects, for example, implementing a SDK for our solution in a new programming language that we, work on. And what we did is to finance an audit of that code to make sure that the entire ecosystem, whether it's directly related to the solution or the tools that we use, are safe to use. Obviously, it's not perfect. There's still things that we may not catch, or basically risk that we feel are not that we cannot cover and mitigate for, and that would still be important for people. So there's still a need for people to understand what is their risk profile and what they are trying to achieve, and if the solution meet that. Obviously, like we cannot, like if you're like a whistleblower or you're a journalist, you do not have the same profile than if you're like an accountant, or it's just the risks are so different for all these type of personas. And so the way we approach this is by publishing like a security white paper where we explain, okay, these are the residual risk of the solution, and you can decide for yourself if that solution is a good fit for you or not. So depending on if you if you want to have more privacy, or if you're okay giving up that little bit of privacy in exchange of usability, you may not choose the same solution. So we try to be transparent and not like do blanket statement like we are 100% secure, or like we've been audited, so you can trust that nothing more will ever happen.
I think anybody who makes a statement like that is worth disregarding. It's funny you mentioned that, because I just had this conversation with somebody yesterday about audits and certifications. No, they don't guarantee security. They show that you meet a certain baseline of expectations.
Yes. But you've done, it's basically your homework, and it's never finishing.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned giving back a bit earlier. I want to touch on that. In your comments that you sent me before our call, you mentioned telemetry and discussion about telemetry in the open source world. What do you mean by that? I mean, there's obviously this discussion about, giving back. Is it mandatory? Is it expected? Tell me a little bit about what your approach is to this and what your experiences are with again, contributing back and benefiting from these cooperative projects.
So it's been a debate in the open source community, like whether like telemetry is acceptable, even if it's anonymized or not.
Well, can you define telemetry before? I mean, for those of you who are not familiar with the term.
Yes, it's information on usage. So, for example, if you have an operating system, it's interesting for the maintainer of this operating system to know how many users are using a given package or a given version of the package. So like, for example, okay, I can deprecate that package because nobody is using it, or like, okay, there are only 3 people using that package, so maybe it's not worth putting that much effort in it, or identify like applications that are growing very fast, and you're like, okay, I need to put my attention there because maybe they didn't have like a security audit or whatnot. So this is, for example, at the operating system level, and then like on all the, like, for example, for developer tools, it would be like a package manager, like library manager, like NPM or Composer, or, like any programming language that you use generally come with a package manager. So this is interesting for them to know where to place their efforts. And inside software, you would have the same kind of things, like what functionalities are used by people, which version of my software people are running, so that I know, like, I can deprecate these versions. And so these are all very important information for developers to have, And then there is also like the part which is like a bit more, the dark side of telemetry, which is, how can I optimize usage, or how can I make sure that I can build some anti-pattern so that people don't use that functionality that much. So, for example, if I roll out this new feature, can I reduce the number of people that are deinstalling the application? So telemetry can be used for that as well. So usage-based information. And some of them can even go like too far into trying to profile you, like, what kind of person are you, like, what are your, like, your age, your location, all these kind of things, to try to segment even further the audience, to maybe like build different marketing appeals, or try to optimize revenue or adoption. So there's a whole spectrum of things that you can do with telemetry. And because people are afraid of the thing that can go wrong, they tend to be very careful and like reject telemetry. They see it as a foot in the door, even though you do something that is truly anonymized and that is used for the developers to make sure that they put their attention where it should be. People are afraid that it will become just a Trojan horse for like all this bad stuff. And so they, especially in the open source world, where people are like quite aware of the risk and the challenges around privacy, the consensus is that they reject opt-out telemetry, and they want telemetry to be opt-in. And we have seen ourselves, like, when telemetry is opt-in, nobody opt-ins. So it defeats the purpose.
I love the phrase, the dark side of telemetry, and I'm going to have to give you the geek award for the week for that. That's fantastic. I think this is actually a really interesting illustration of a much, much broader topic, which is that not all things which could be used for nefarious purposes are nefarious. And one that we've
Yeah,
seen historically over 30 years in the tech world is that a lot of things are somebody thinks, hey, data is cool, data is useful, we can use data without really necessarily paying attention to its possible downsides, while there are definitely people out there who kind of slip into the more opportunistic side of things. So I think it's a good, maybe also at a macro level, a good reminder to everybody, just kind of don't be paranoid, but stay vigilant. On the topic of good intentions, we've got a couple of minutes left. I want to completely shift gears again. And you mentioned a couple of things which I'd actually like to pick up with you at some point in the future in a separate conversation. And I want to talk about laws. Right? With security, in the security industry, it always comes down to some degree to privacy laws, to security laws. And you mentioned two in your notes, the UK, the chat proposal, chat control, as it's called, and the European Cyber Resilience Act. Now, I think the Cyber Resilience Act is a huge topic that's for a separate, spot. UK encryption right now is a huge issue. You guys, as a security provider, and you're also a member of Encryption Europe, blatant plug for that organization. It's a really good group. Check them out. Talk a little bit about the chat control law in the UK. What do you see as the dangers? What is it? What's your take on it?
I think it's not a new thing. Like, so you've been in this game for a while, so you know that it's like a seasonal thing that every once in a while somebody tries to break end-to-end encryption.
This is,
Under the
I mean, you mentioned millennial. You don't remember Clipper chip, right?
Yeah, it's like
No,
it's just keeps coming back, and every time people are saying no, and it just keeps coming back, and every like these they are like dedicated association, like for example in France, like Quadrature du Net, who just they have been fighting these kind of laws for like 20 years or more, and every time it's like this the the it makes me think of the Simpsons, like this lady in the Simpsons was
won't somebody
the
think of the children?
yeah, when somebody think of the
Yeah,
children,
yeah.
it's always like this, and like we've tried everything else, and this is the only thing that is left, and that the only thing that would work. Uh, it it is disguised as a good intention, but pretty much like it will remove the rights for privacy to everybody. So on one side, you're advocating for human rights, which are like very important. Like child abuse is a very important problem that needs to be addressed seriously. But at the same time, you want, under the pretext of solving that problem, you want to remove everybody else's human right for privacy. So I think like this will keep happening, like whether it's successful this time, I don't know, but like if it's not successful this time, you'll see in 5 years another law which would name differently will try to do the same thing.
When I read the Signal Foundation's response to the proposed law, I was like, oh God, not this again.
Yes.
And
And the IFF, Signal, everybody, like Matrix, everyone is saying this is a bad idea. Like, so.
Well, this is why we give money to the EFF and our friends, So, and by the way, also a plug for that wonderful organization if you've got a couple of bucks lying around. And, Cyan is a not-for-profit, so we don't lobby. But my personal opinion is I totally agree with you, and this is a really stupid idea. I just find it, often frustrating that we're always back to the people who don't care about privacy, the people who are willing to accept, reductions of their privacy because whatever reason, and the people who are susceptible to the paranoia of terror. It's either terrorists or organized crime or children, right? It's always one of those three, basically.
Pretty much.
So yeah, I thank you for that. I think that's a really important point to make. I don't want to shoehorn politics too much into this, but I think if you say I don't like politics, then you're blinding yourself to some fundamental aspects of, if you are an actor in the information security world, this is privacy and security are really topics that you need to stay on top of. I think it's almost kind of a moral obligation, if I can be so bold. So I thank you for that take on that. It's sometimes you kind of doubt yourself, but it's good to hear that there's always people out there who are taking a pretty firm stand on these things, and I hope our friends in the UK see the light and do the right thing. So that said, I want to slowly wrap up. I want to thank you very, very much for your time. On a very cheerful note, a reminder, CYAN, the Cybersecurity Advisors Network, is a not-for-profit global trust network of cybersecurity, risk management, and policy and other professionals around the world. We are at cybersecurityadvisors.network. If you're interested in talking to us for whatever reason, if you'd like to join us, if you'd like to work with one of our various initiatives that we start for the benefit of cybersecurity and resilience in society. I do want to thank Remy very much for his time. Give him some love. Give him a visit at www.passbolt.com. Looks like an interesting tool. I'm actually going to be looking for a new password manager at some time, so that's it's a good tip. I will put all the information about Remy, his work, the various topics that we mentioned in the description. And, I hope to have you on again when we can talk in depth about some of the topics that we didn't get around to today. For example, security in not-for-profits, the European Cyber Resilience Act. You mentioned SOC 2. I think we've got enough for about 3 videos in this. So I hope that Luxembourg is as sunny and warm as down here in Spain and not raining all the time. Wish you a wonderful rest of the afternoon and a successful and quiet week, and hope to talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot for having me, John. It was great talking to you.
Thank you, Remy.
Thank you for joining us in this latest edition of the Secure in Mind podcast series, courtesy of the Cybersecurity Advisors Network. Visit us at cybersecurityadvisors.network/media and /blog for additional episodes and articles. Follow us on LinkedIn, YouTube, SoundCloud, Podcast Republic, and iTunes, and don't hesitate to get in touch. Stay safe, stay smart, stay educated, and stay secure.